Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are exploring some truly fascinating territory today, diving deep into a system that proposes a kind of radical new way to think about healing and well-being. Our source material for this journey comes from excerpts of a text called the Synkronia System, authored by José Julio Córdova Jaramillo, known as Doteca, and intriguingly co-designed with a customized AI named Onto.
That's right. And at its core, this system presents a really powerful idea that deep, lasting healing and, a sense of true well-being aren't just about addressing symptoms or fixing what feels broken.
Okay.
It's fundamentally about restoring rhythmic synchrony across all your internal systems, your biology, your mind, your emotions, your very sense of time, and even your relationships.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. The central thesis, according to these source texts, is that you simply cannot achieve sustainable healing unless these inner systems, the biological, emotional, cognitive, narrative, and relational, are brought back into a state of rhythmic synchrony. It's a big claim, right?
Yeah.
And it really challenges the way we often approach self-improvement or therapeutic work.
Absolutely. It steps away from the common narrative that says if you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed, anxious, or just like you're not living the life you want, it's down to a personal failing.
Yeah, like it's your fault.
Right. A lack of willpower or not believing enough or fundamentally being broken somehow. The system suggests that maybe the real issue is something far more universal and, in a strange way, simpler. Your internal clocks, your body's deep rhythms are just out of alignment.
So this deep dive is our mission today, to take these source materials and really break down this Synkronia system. We'll explore why many traditional or single-focus approaches might fall short of creating lasting change. We want to understand what this Ontosinclectic therapy framework is all about and see how it proposes this new rhythm-first approach to well-being. We're here to find those surprising nuggets of insight, those aha moments that might make you look at your own life and struggles through a completely different lens.
Think of it less like fixing a faulty part and more like tuning a complex, beautiful instrument that's just gone slightly flat. You're aiming for harmony, for the parts to resonate together.
Right. Let's jump right in then by looking at the problem this system is designed to solve, which it identifies as desynchronization.
Yeah, the source material kicks things off by really drilling into a common experience. That frustrating feeling that so many healing efforts just, they don't stick. You've probably tried things, maybe traditional talk therapy, somatic practices, meditation apps.
Journaling, changing your diet, supplements.
Exactly. Fitness routines, you're intellectually doing the work, you know what you're supposed to do, but you still find yourself looping in old patterns, feeling stuck in the same emotional states, or just unable to get that fundamental shift into genuine ease or flourishing.
It's incredibly relatable. You have the knowledge, you're putting in the effort, and yet the system isn't changing in a deep, sustainable way.
Right.
And the source material specifically pushes back against the idea that this is your fault.
Right.
That you're not trying hard enough, or that there's something inherently wrong with you.
Exactly. And this is where the core thesis comes in again. The real issue, they argue, is internal desynchronization. And they make it clear this isn't just some fluffy metaphor.
Okay.
It's described as a tangible state where your various internal systems, your biology, your emotions, your cognitive processes, your personal narrative, how you relate to others are operating out of rhythmic synchrony with each other, and crucially, out of sync with the present moment.
Wow. So you might be physically sitting here in, say, 2024, but your biology is still running on stress hormones from a crisis years ago, making it feel like 3 a.m. even if the sun is shining.
Exactly. Or your emotional system could be reacting to current triggers with the intensity and patterns it learned during a traumatic event in, say, 2007.
Right.
Your internal self-story might be frozen based on a conclusion you drew about yourself when you were 16, even though you're a completely different person now. Your behavior could be chronically driven by cortisol levels designed for immediate threat, keeping you in perpetual hypervigilance or freeze.
Those are really powerful examples from the text, aren't they? The system emphasizes that this state of desynchronization makes even genuinely effective tools ineffective at that moment.
Trying to apply a cognitive reframing technique to calm racing thoughts is almost impossible when your physical body is biologically wired for panic because its rhythm is screaming, "Danger! 1 a.m. cortisol spike," even if it's 2 p.m.
Right, your body's not buying it.
Not at all. Or doing deep emotional release work late at night might not land productively, but instead spiral into anxiety because your system is winding down, not gearing up for intense processing.
It's like having an orchestra where the strings are playing one tempo, the brass another, and the percussion a third. They might each be playing notes, but there's no harmony, no coherence. It's just noise.
That's a great way to put it. And this highlights another key problem the source identifies: fragmentation. Many approaches tend to treat symptoms or parts of the system in isolation.
Yeah.
They work on the anxious thought or the stuck emotion, the physical tension, or the communication pattern in a relationship as if they are separate issues. But the human system, as the source describes, is profoundly interconnected, layered, and fundamentally rhythmic.
Right.
Addressing one piece without considering its timing and connection to the whole clockwork often leads to those gains being temporary, or the system just snapping back to its default desynchronized state.
It's the difference between polishing a single gear and tuning the entire grandfather clock so all the gears move together smoothly.
Precisely. And that brings us to the system they propose to address this fundamental issue.
All right, so let's introduce the Synkronia system and the framework behind it, Ontosinclectic therapy. First, the name Synkronia. What's the origin story there?
Okay, so the source explains the name Synkronia is deliberately constructed. It fuses synchrony, meaning operating in concert, and chronobiology, the study of biological rhythms.
Okay.
The K is added, they say, to acknowledge its philosophical roots in ontosynclecticism. The simplest definition they offer is to come back into rhythm with your biology, your emotions, your thoughts, your relationships, and your internal sense of time. That phrase itself is the destination, the target state.
So it's not just a catchy name for a set of techniques. It's defining the state of being it aims to restore. And the source is quite explicit in positioning it not as another self-help hack, not promising a quick fix,
Right.
but a designed system for individuals who have genuinely tried various approaches and still feel that deeper sense of being fundamentally out of sync.
Yes, it speaks to that level of frustration and seeking something more foundational. The radical thesis, which they keep returning to, is that lasting healing requires restoring rhythmic synchrony of your inner systems. And crucially, it's presented as a reintegration model. It doesn't tell you to throw away everything you've learned from therapy, coaching, or other practices. It invites you to fuse that knowledge, test it within this new framework, and reorder how and when you apply it based on your system's current rhythm.
Okay, that makes sense. It's adding a layer, a new organizing principle.
Yeah.
So what about ontosinclectic therapy? That's a bit of a mouthful. What does that framework entail?
It is a mouthful, yeah, but the source breaks it down as the underlying logic and structure for Synkronia. The name Ontosinclectic comes from three key ideas: ontology.
The study of being, identity, meaning who are you really?
Right. Then syncretism, the ability to harmonize and reconcile distinct or even opposing schools of thought. And eclecticism, the selective integration of effective elements from a wide range of disciplines: science, various therapies, philosophical traditions.
That's a direct contrast to the choose your lane model we talked about earlier, like strictly practicing only CBT or only somatic experiences.
Precisely. Ontosinclectic therapy explicitly refuses to be confined to one lane. It recognizes that the human system is inherently multidimensional. Your emotional state, your physical sensations, your internal stories, your neurological patterns, the symbols that hold meaning for you, and your relationships.
They all have to shift together.
Yes, and they must shift together in a coordinated rhythm for transformation to be lasting.
So the unique differentiator isn't just being multimodal, but using time and rhythm as the core organizing principle, the thing that holds all these pieces together.
That's the key insight. Synkronia evaluates every part of your system, every therapeutic technique, every practice, not just for its effectiveness in isolation, but for its timing, its cyclical nature, and its potential to contribute to overall synchronization.
Right.
The primary goal isn't to make a specific symptom disappear, although that often happens as a side effect. The goal is resynchronization, because when your internal systems are in rhythmic alignment, the symptoms of desynchronization tend to subside naturally.
And this is where the collaboration with Onto, the customized AI, fits into the picture. The course calls it a neural sparring partner.
Yes, the author Jota is very clear that Onto wasn't used to write prose. Instead, this GPT-4o-based AI was trained specifically on the principles of ontosinclectic logic.
Interesting.
It acted as a kind of co-designer, a second consciousness trained to think in layered rhythms and connections across disciplines. It helped test ideas, challenge the human author's assumptions, synthesize vast amounts of research data through this unique lens, and propose systemic configurations that a single human mind might overlook.
Wow.
The description is that it could see patterns and rhythms in the data in a way that mirrored the system's philosophy.
That's a fascinating and novel way to use AI in developing a complex system like this, not for content generation, but for philosophical and structural co-creation. Okay, before we jump into the nuts and bolts of the system's layers, the source includes a read this first section that addresses common misconceptions. It's probably wise to tackle those head-on.
Absolutely. They anticipate the usual assumptions. First, it's explicitly stated, this is not just another mindset system. While cognitive work is included, it's deeply integrated with biology, physical rhythm, emotional processing, and relational dynamics. It's far more holistic than just reframing thoughts.
And it doesn't offer to fix you, which feels different from a lot of the wellness space.
It's very intentional about that language. You're not viewed as broken in the first place. You're viewed as desynchronized. The system provides a map and a set of tools to help you understand your unique rhythm, identify where the desynchronization is occurring, and then recalibrate yourself. Healing is framed as a rhythmic process of return, not a rescue mission where someone else fixes you.
You don't need to read the whole book or understand every single part before starting. That takes a lot of pressure off.
Huge pressure. It's designed to be layered. You can enter the system wherever your system feels ready, or where the most obvious desynchronization is happening. Maybe it's your sleep, your emotional reactivity, or a feeling of being stuck in a story. Starting anywhere helps begin the process of recalibration for the rest.
And it doesn't reject existing therapeutic modalities like CBT, IFS, ACT, somatic work.
Not at all. It views them as valuable, powerful tools, but it suggests they become significantly more effective and their results more durable when they are applied within a framework that understands and supports the body's fundamental need for rhythmic and biological coherence. It adds that missing layer of temporal intelligence,
I think a lot of people feel like they need to be calm or regulated before they can even start deep healing work. This system addresses that.
Crucially, it's designed precisely for those who are in chaos, exhaustion, or deep dysregulation. The system uses the intentional application of simple rhythms to create regulation, rather than requiring regulation as a prerequisite.
Okay.
You start with fundamental anchors to build stability, and then work your way through the layers.
It might look complex on the page, but you don't need to grasp the entire architecture from day one.
That's right. They argue that the complexity mirrors the actual complexity of the human system. But the practices are modular. You can pick one axis, one protocol, and begin. The 21-day cycle, which we'll discuss, is designed for just this kind of focused, rhythmic re-entrainment.
Is it strictly science-based, or is there a philosophical element?
It explicitly draws from both. It's evidence-aligned, incorporating neuroscience, chronobiology, somatic research. But the philosophical roots, ontology, syncretism, provide the framework for understanding meaning, identity, and the interconnectedness of systems in a way pure science often doesn't. It seeks coherence that spans both objective data and subjective experience.
And it's not only for people with clinical diagnoses or severe trauma.
No, the source posits that rhythm is a fundamental human need. Anyone feeling a sense of disconnect, low energy, lack of flow, or just not quite right can benefit. Desynchronization is presented as a spectrum of human experience, not just pathology.
Finally, and this is important, you will fall out of sync again. This isn't promising a permanent fix.
That's a key point, and it ties back to healing being rhythmic, not a one-time event. Synkronia is presented as a return system. Life happens, stress happens, things will pull you out of rhythm. The goal is to build the capacity to recognize it happening faster and to have the system and tools to come back into alignment more skillfully and with less struggle.
Right.
It doesn't require belief for it to work. It requires entrainment and practice based on biological and systemic timing. Skepticism is explicitly welcomed.
That read this first section really does set the stage. Start where you are, don't need to understand everything, focus on rhythm if stuck, the 21-day cycle is core, and just begin. It makes the system feel accessible despite its depth.
It anchors you in the present moment and the immediate practice, rather than feeling overwhelmed by the theoretical architecture.
Okay, with that foundation laid, let's dive into the heart of the system. The 8 axes of resynchronization. This is where the source details the different layers of our internal clockwork that need to come back into sync.
Yep.
Let's start with Axis I, neurobiological repair. Why begin here?
This system is very clear. Before you process your past, you must stabilize your present. And that present moment stability, they argue, begins with the fundamental biological environment of your brain and nervous system.
Okay.
Your thoughts, your emotions, your ability to regulate yourself, they don't float freely in a void. They are deeply influenced by the chemical environment of neurotransmitters, hormones, sleep cycles, gut health, nutrient status, and light-dark exposure.
So if that biological environment is chaotic or depleted, everything else you try is going to be incredibly difficult.
Exactly. It's an uphill battle. The source describes the brain not just as a calculating machine, but as a highly rhythm-sensitive organ. They frame common issues like chemical imbalances, low baseline GABA contributing to anxiety, depleted dopamine affecting motivation, chronically high cortisol keeping you wired as timing failures inside the brain.
Timing failures.
Yeah. The chemicals aren't necessarily missing, but their cycles and regulation are off, creating a non-optimal state for navigating life or healing.
That perspective shift is powerful. It's not just about having the right amount of a chemical, but having it present and cycling correctly in time. The source gives that striking example of waking up after poor sleep.
It's so relatable, isn't it? You wake up and immediately your cortisol is elevated at the wrong time of day, your insulin sensitivity is impaired, your lymphatic system hasn't fully cleared waste. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm center, is on high alert, while your prefrontal cortex, the rational planning part, is sluggish. You are instantly operating from a biological deficit, making you more emotionally reactive, less able to focus, and less resilient to stress. Trying to do deep therapeutic work from that state is often counterproductive.
So neurobiological repair is really about setting that foundational biological rhythm so the rest of the system has a stable base to work from. The source details 5 key biological systems they target in this phase, focusing specifically on their rhythmic function.
Yes, the emphasis is always on the timing. First, neurotransmitters. Not just looking at levels of GABA, dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, and norepinephrine, but understanding their natural cycles throughout the 24-hour period and supporting their healthy regulation. Simple things like proper nutrient intake and light exposure affect this rhythm. Second, sleep cycles. Beyond just total hours, they focus on the architecture of sleep, getting sufficient deep sleep and REM sleep, and stabilizing the cortisol curve, which should be high in the morning and low at night. Good sleep hygiene becomes critical, not just as a rule, but as a way to create consistent circadian anchoring signals for the body's master clock. Consistent pre-sleep rituals tell the system it's safe to down-regulate for rest.
It's about making sleep work for you, not just suffering through it.
Exactly. Third, inflammation and the gut-brain axis. Recognizing that inflammation isn't just physical. It profoundly impacts mood, anxiety, and cognitive function through the gut-brain connection.
Right.
Things like food sensitivities, dysbiosis in the microbiome, and chronic stress contribute to this inflammation, disrupting the rhythmic signaling between the gut and brain. Supporting this involves potentially using supplements like probiotics or omega-3s and focusing on anti-inflammatory foods, all seen as supporting overall systemic rhythm and communication.
So gut health isn't a separate wellness trend here. It's integral to the biological rhythm of the brain.
Precisely. Fourth, nutrient repletion. Addressing common nutrient deficiencies often exacerbated by chronic stress and trauma, things like magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, vitamin D, and key amino acids. Depletion impairs numerous biological processes, disrupting rhythms. The focus is on consistent replenishment to restore functional capacity.
Makes sense.
And fifth, light, movement, and timing inputs. Leveraging powerful external cues. Morning sunlight exposure is a critical signal for resetting the circadian rhythm and boosting serotonin. Movement is a potent physical and emotional regulator that helps process stress hormones. Structured meal timing provides predictable metabolic signals. The focus is on using these inputs to create reliable, predictable timing signals that help your system trust its internal clocks again.
The goal isn't perfect, optimal chemistry 24/7, but establishing reliable, repeatable timing signals so the body can settle into its natural rhythms.
That's the key takeaway. When the body begins to trust that stability and predictability, it can finally downregulate its chronic defense systems. This creates the biological space needed for everything else: processing emotions, changing thought patterns, integrating past experiences to actually land and stick. It's building the solid ground before you start constructing the rest of the building.
It makes so much intuitive sense. You need a calm, stable, biological state to do the complex work of healing. And from the neurobiological, the system moves to the somatic.
Axis 2, somatic intelligence. The source starts with a very powerful declaration. The body is not a passive container, it is a memory system.
That shifts the whole perspective, doesn't it? It's not just a vehicle for the brain.
Not at all. The body, they argue, remembers on its own terms, through physical sensations, chronic tension patterns, breath holding, postural habits, and restricted movement. Even if your conscious mind can't access a specific traumatic memory, the body continues to hold and repeat the protective patterns it learned during that event.
Like that unexplained knot in your stomach every time you have a difficult conversation? Or flinching when someone raises their voice, even if you're perfectly safe in the moment.
Exactly. That's somatic memory expressing itself. The system frames the body not as something you need to force to calm down, but something you need to listen to because it speaks the truth before the mind is ready. The body's signals are primary data about your state and history.
What are the key areas they focus on within this axis?
First, interoception. This is your capacity to sense internal bodily states, not just obvious ones like hunger or thirst, but subtle cues like your heart rate, muscle tension, temperature regulation, and crucially, internal feelings of safety or threat.
Okay.
Trauma and chronic stress profoundly disrupt interoception, leading people to either become disconnected from their bodies entirely or to be constantly flooded by overwhelming sensations. Rebuilding interoception, slowly and safely, is presented as fundamental to somatic repair, regaining clarity on what your body is actually communicating.
So you can distinguish between a present moment sensation and a triggered memory in the body.
Yes, gaining that discernment is key. Second, breath. Beyond just being an indicator of emotional state, the breath is a powerful lever for changing it, especially when used rhythmically. The system emphasizes using specific diaphragmatic and cadence breathing protocols, not just for general relaxation, but for targeted regulation and stabilization of the nervous system. Matching breath to specific rhythms sends safety signals.
Using breath intentionally as a tool for nervous system regulation.
Right. Then, posture and muscle memory. They argue that many of our physical habits, a slumped posture, habitually tense shoulders, a guarded stance, are actually learned emotional positions, physical echoes of how we survived challenging environments, especially in childhood.
Wow.
The source has a powerful line. You can't open a new identity in the posture of the old one. This axis connects these physical habits directly to learned survival patterns and suggests the need for micro-movement, repatterning small, intentional changes in posture or movement to shift the body's default state.
That's a profound idea, that your physical stance is literally holding an old emotional pattern, and changing it can support letting go.
It sees the body as an active participant in identity. Finally, listening for what the body repeats. Actively noticing those recurring physical patterns, chronic holding, contracting, bracing, feeling numb. These aren't framed as deficits or dysfunctions, but as protective strategies that your system developed. The work is to learn from them, decode their original purpose, and thank them while teaching the body new, safer patterns for the present.
It's about befriending the body's wisdom, not fighting against it.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that this doesn't require intense, overwhelming reliving of past trauma. It's about gently including the body as a crucial, honest narrator of your experience. The body, they say, has been patiently waiting for you to finally listen.
Once the biological and somatic foundations are addressed, the system moves into the realm of emotions.
Axis third, emotional reprocessing using the RISC model. Emotion here is given a dynamic definition. Energy trying to complete a pattern.
Okay, energy trying to complete a pattern.
Yeah. The source discusses the consequences of blocking this energy, leading to stagnation, releasing it chaotically without integration, leading to overwhelm, or processing it skillfully, leading to completion and transformation.
RISE. Recognize, integrate, somatically release, encode. It sounds like a deliberate timed sequence.
It is. It's a structured protocol that draws intelligently from various trauma therapy approaches, somatic release techniques, cognitive work, and the science of memory reconsolidation. Each phase has a specific purpose and builds on the others.
Okay, break it down for us. Recognize.
Recognize. This is about consciously identifying and naming the emotion without collapsing into it or getting fused with it. It involves practices like affect labeling, using precise words for feelings, locating the emotion in the body, connecting back to axis 2, distinguishing primary emotions, the core feeling, from secondary emotions, reactions to the primary feeling, like shame about being scared, and recognizing the pattern of this emotion showing up. This initial step is crucial for reducing the immediate reactivity of the amygdala.
So giving the emotion a clear name and a physical address helps create some distance and clarity.
Exactly. It allows the prefrontal cortex to come online. Second, integrate. This phase restores the context around the emotion. Emotions that feel overwhelming or stuck often lack a coherent narrative or are attached to an outdated story.
Right.
Integration reconnects the emotion to its original source, the unmet need that underlies it, like a need for safety, connection, or control, and the belief about yourself or the world that formed as a result. Tools here include timeline tracing, need identification, cognitive reappraisal, asking what else could this mean, and symbolic association. It's about bringing the emotion into alignment with reality, not just intellectualizing it.
Giving the emotion its proper time and place in your history.
Yeah.
Anchoring it.
Yes, exactly. Third, somatically release. This is the physical component, giving the body permission to complete the emotional energy cycle through movement. Drawing from somatic experiencing and tension release exercises, this could involve gentle shaking, rhythmic breath cycling specific to release, using sound or grounded physical movement. The absolute key here is dosage and rhythm.
Dosage and rhythm. Okay.
You match the intensity and pace of the release to your system's capacity, ensuring it's a process of completion, not catharsis that overwhelms you.
So it's not about an uncontrolled emotional outburst, but a guided physical process matched to what your body can handle.
Precisely. It's intelligent release. And finally, encode. This is arguably the most unique and critical phase for lasting change. It's about ensuring that the reprocessed emotional pattern sticks by giving your brain a new, updated reference point. Without this encoding, the system tends to revert back to the old, familiar, even if painful, pattern. Encoding tools include ritualized closure, a gesture, a specific phrase, a symbolic act. Anchoring, pairing the newly regulated state with a physical cue. Journaling that includes explicit identity statements, I now see, I choose to respond. And scheduling reinforcement practices. This phase is where insight is transformed into neurological memory, locking in the new default response.
That's the real nugget here, isn't it? The processing isn't enough. It's the encoding that creates the lasting change by giving the brain a new ending to the old story.
That's the insight. RISE is presented as a repeatable loop, respecting time and capacity at each phase. It's used not just for single emotions, but for tackling broader themes, like closing trauma loops, updating core identity beliefs that formed in childhood, and synchronizing emotional responses with your current biological cycles. It's a flexible but robust protocol for transforming stuck emotional energy.
Moving from processing emotions to understanding the landscape where those emotions often play out the mind.
Axis the fourth, parts, patterns, and internal dialogue. This axis tackles the internal experience of having multiple voices or conflicting impulses within you.
Right, we all have that.
Exactly. The source frames the mind not as a single, unified entity that's broken, but as a system of voices, identities, roles, and protective mechanisms. This multiplicity is presented as structure, not pathology. We all have these internal parts, the part that wants to work, the part that wants to rest, the inner critic, the scared child part, the part that wants to flee, the part that manages everything. These are roles and protective strategies formed to help us survive.
And when these parts are in conflict, it can feel like you're working against yourself.
Yeah.
Like internal gridlock.
Exactly. Unresolved internal conflict is a major energy drain and can actively block healing. If one part, like a protector, is resisting change because it genuinely believes it's keeping you safe, or if an inner critic is constantly undermining your efforts, it creates a stalemate. These parts are seen as carrying patterns learned in earlier survival contexts that haven't received the memo that the present is different.
So this axis is about bringing some organization to that internal landscape. How does the system guide this?
It uses an internal dialogue mapping framework with 3 phases, emphasizing structured conversation with yourself. First, identification of parts. Learning to name and observe these parts without judgment, recognizing their distinct tone of voice, their physical posture, connecting back to axis a second, their core belief about the world, and the underlying need they were originally trying to meet. The fundamental principle is that every part formed with a positive intention to help you survive or cope.
Giving these internal voices names like the manager or the worrier helps create some distance and objectivity, doesn't it?
It does. It externalizes them slightly within the internal landscape, making them subjects of curiosity rather than just overwhelming feelings. Second, pattern mapping. This is about tracking when specific parts show up, what they say, connecting to cognitive patterns, what emotion they carry, connecting to axis the third and RISE, and what actions they drive. This is done through specific journaling prompts, tracing back triggers, and noticing contextual cues. It reveals that many of our reactions and internal struggles are not spontaneous breakdowns, but rehearsed patterns enacted by these parts. Once you see the script the parts are following, you gain the possibility of changing the play.
Seeing the pattern is the first step to creating choice. Makes sense.
Precisely. And third, dialogic integration. This is the process of coordinating the parts under the guidance of the core self, the calm, compassionate, wise core that is not a part. It's not about getting rid of parts, but integrating them so they work together.
Right.
This is achieved through structured internal dialogue. You validate the part's original purpose. Thank you, manager, for trying to keep me safe by controlling everything. Updated on the present reality. I appreciate that, but I'm 40 now, and that level of control isn't needed in this situation. Negotiate new roles. Maybe you can help by just noticing potential issues instead of trying to fix them all. And pair this dialogue with somatic grounding or symbolic anchors connecting to axis, tech, and V.
So the inner critic might be integrated into wise discernment. The scared child part is seen and protected by the adult self. The overwhelmed manager gets permission to rest.
Exactly. The parts shift from being saboteurs or overwhelming forces to becoming signals that provide valuable information about your internal state and needs. The internal system moves from constant conflict and reactivity to a state of coordinated responsiveness. This framework provides a crucial internal container that supports the practices in other axes, helping RISE land safely, integrating somatic shifts, and laying the groundwork for updating your fundamental story.
Which is axis V symbol and story. This takes us into the narrative dimension of healing. Healing is narrative reconstruction, the source states.
Yes, the core idea here is that the stories we tell ourselves about our past, especially challenging events, aren't just passive recounting. The meaning we locked into those stories, often in the heat of the moment, or from the perspective of a younger, less resourced self, determines whether those past events continue to drive our present experience and lead to repetition. The brain is an expert editor, constantly crafting a narrative to make sense of things and keep us safe. But that narrative can become frozen in time, creating an identity scaffold based on outdated conclusions in an outdated context.
So, if the story you're carrying is based on a conclusion drawn by your 8-year-old self during a difficult event, it can keep your adult self stuck in that same pattern of interpretation.
Absolutely. Updating that story is essential work. The process involves 4 steps outlined in this axis. First, narrative mapping. Identifying and locating the pivotal stories in your life that still hold significant emotional charge or seem to define you.
Right.
These could be emotional high points, ruptures, moments of intense challenge, or those looping narratives you constantly tell yourself or others. You analyze the characters, your role within the story, the emotional arc, and most importantly, the core beliefs about yourself, others, or the world that you formed during or after that event.
Identifying the key chapters that still feel like they dictate the rest of the book.
Right. Second, symbol decoding. This is fascinating. Finding the specific symbols within those memories and stories. These aren't necessarily grand archetypes. They can be small, specific details, a particular phrase someone used, a specific color that was present, an object, a gesture, a sound. The nervous system often assigns deep, visceral meaning to these symbols during intense moments, and they can become triggers that instantly pull you back into the emotional state of the original event.
Like a specific shade of blue making you feel instantly anxious because it was the color of the wall in a difficult room from your childhood.
A perfect example. The body and brain recognize the symbol and react before the conscious mind catches up. Third, meaning reassignment. This is the core work of updating the story and the symbols. It involves actively reinterpreting the narrative and those loaded symbols from your current adult perspective. Asking questions like, what else could this moment mean? What strengths did I develop because I navigated this? What would my current resourced self tell my past self in that moment? It's not about denying the pain or difficulty of the original event, but about reclaiming authorship and finding new, empowering meaning.
Becoming the intentional editor of your life story, not just a character stuck in the script.
Exactly. You gain agency. And fourth, ritual sealing. This is crucial for encoding the updated story and meaning, connecting back to the encode phase in RISE. making the narrative reprocessing feel permanent for your system through intentional ritual. This could involve writing letters to the past self or other people in the story, symbolically replacing an object associated with the old meaning, making spoken declarations of the new narrative, or mentally revisiting the timeline of the event as your current strong self. These rituals are powerful neurological signals that tell your system, this loop is closed, the meaning has been updated, you are free to integrate this and move forward.
And these narrative rituals need to integrate with the previous layers, RISE for the emotions, somatic work for the body, internal dialogue for the parts, because the system as a whole needs to feel safe and ready to let go of the old story and embody the new one.
Precisely. The story isn't just in your head, it's encoded throughout your system. All the layers need to support the narrative shift.
So far, we've journeyed through the internal landscape, setting the biological foundation, listening to the body, processing emotions, understanding internal parts, and updating our personal narrative. Now let's circle back to the core concept of time itself with Axis 6 Chrono Sleep Design System, CSDS.
This axis returns to that fundamental premise. You cannot heal out of rhythm. The source argues that even if you've had profound emotional breakthroughs or gained incredible cognitive insights, if your physical body and nervous system aren't living inside time aligned with biological rhythms, those gains will struggle to stick.
Right.
The human system isn't just influenced by time. It is deeply governed by ancient, hardwired physiological rhythms. Circadian, daily, ultradian, shorter cycles within the day, infradian, monthly, like menstrual cycles, and social rhythms. These are not just metaphors, they are biological clocks that regulate everything from hormone release to attention spans to emotional resilience.
And Chrono Sleep Design is the practical system for getting these biological clocks back in sync.
Yes, it's presented as the fundamental biological scaffolding of Synkronia. The insight here is radical. To truly resynchronize the mind, emotions, and story, you must first resynchronize your physical system with time itself. CSDS provides specific protocols designed to realign these fundamental rhythms.
What are they?
First, circadian reset. This tackles the ubiquitous disruption caused by artificial light, inconsistent sleep schedules, late-night screens, and poorly timed meals caffeine. The protocols involve things like ensuring morning sunlight exposure soon after waking, a powerful circadian signal, establishing fixed wake and sleep times even on weekends, and structuring your environment to support the natural light-dark cycle. The goal is not just better sleep, but establishing rhythmic integrity for your body's master clock.
Providing those consistent, clear signals to the body's central timekeeper.
Exactly. Second, ultradian rhythm anchoring. This recognizes the natural 90 to 120-minute cycles where our brain and body are optimized for focused work, followed by a dip requiring recovery.
The 90-minute cycles.
Yeah. The protocol suggests structuring your day around these cycles, aiming for roughly 90 minutes of focused effort, followed by 15-20 minutes of intentional recovery. Getting up, moving, stepping outside, brief breath practice. The source emphasizes that these are biological maintenance windows, not just permission to be lazy. Honoring them stabilizes mood, improves focus, and significantly reduces the cumulative burden of stress hormones.
That's a key insight, seeing these breaks not as lost time, but as a necessary biological function for sustained performance and well-being.
Absolutely, it's a form of active regulation. Third, sleep architecture optimization. This goes deeper than just sleep duration. It focuses on the quality of sleep, ensuring you get sufficient deep sleep, crucial for physical restoration and clearing waste, and REM sleep, vital for emotional regulation and memory consolidation. It involves aligning with your natural chronotype. Are you a morning lark or night owl? And integrating tools like specific supplements, magnesium, apigenin, relaxation techniques, managing bedroom temperature, and continuing pre-sleep journaling, connecting to Axis V, to prepare the system for restorative rest. Sleep is framed as daily, essential therapy that requires a prepared biological and emotional system.
Getting the right kind of sleep at the right time for your body.
Yes. Fourth, chronobehavioral scheduling. This is the practical application of these rhythmic principles to your daily life. It's about consciously matching specific activities to the times of day when your body and brain are naturally best suited for them.
Like,
for example, doing deep emotional processing work from RISE when your nervous system is naturally more regulated, often earlier in the day. Scheduling social interactions during times when your nervous system window for connection is open. Tackling creative or focused cognitive work during natural dopamine peaks, which vary by chronotype. And using movement strategically to help process stress hormones at the end of a demanding period. This is presented as flexible synchrony, not rigid adherence.
So it's about dancing with your natural rhythms, not forcing a schedule onto a system that's resisting.
Precisely. Time itself becomes a powerful therapeutic intervention. When your body receives consistent, predictable timing signals from CSDS, it can downregulate its chronic defense systems. The emotional system anticipates crisis less often because the biological platform feels secure. The brain is better able to focus and integrate. CSDS provides that essential, non-negotiable biological scaffolding upon which all other healing work is built.
Next, Axis 7th, genetic and epigenetic awareness. This layer acknowledges the reality that we aren't blank slates. We inherit predispositions.
Yes, this axis brings in the influence of inherited patterns, both through our actual genes and through the systems we grew up in, family, culture. The crucial message, however, is that none of these inherited patterns are final or deterministic. This layer isn't about limitation. It's about gaining profound insight for personalized care and self-compassion.
What's the distinction the source makes between genetics and epigenetics in this context?
Genetics, they explain, is your inherited DNA code, the basic script you were given. Epigenetics, however, refers to how your environment and experiences, like chronic stress, trauma, sleep patterns, nutrition, social connection, act like directors, turning certain genes on or off, influencing how that script is read and performed.
Okay, script and director, I like that.
Yeah. The system posits that understanding both your script and how your environment has directed it allows you to work with your unique system more intelligently.
It mentions examples of specific gene variants influencing emotional processing.
Yes, they list examples like variants in genes such as COMT, affecting dopamine processing, MAOA, neurotransmitter metabolism, BDNF, brain growth, and 5-HTTOPR, serotonin transport. These are presented not as destiny, but as tendencies that might make you, for example, more sensitive to stress or process certain emotions differently.
Right.
Knowing these tendencies can inform the design of your personalized healing protocol, PRP, which we'll get to. It fosters self-compassion. My system is just wired to be a bit more sensitive here, rather than self-blame.
And epigenetic load, how does that connect to the idea of inherited trauma?
Epigenetic load is the accumulation of these environmental director's notes on your genetic script over your lifetime and potentially through generations. The idea of inherited trauma or ancestral loops is that the chronic stress or trauma experienced by previous generations can leave epigenetic markings that influence subsequent generations' stress responses and emotional baselines. The source describes these as echoes, a baseline vigilance, anxiety, or sadness that doesn't fully align with your direct life experiences. Identifying these ancestral loops through pattern mapping, Axis 50, or narrative work, Axis V, allows you to consciously interrupt them through intentional practices like setting boundaries, engaging in symbolic closure rituals, or choosing different responses than your ancestors could.
So this awareness of both genetics and epigenetics leads directly to designing a more personalized healing protocol.
Exactly. It's about tailoring your approach based on your unique blueprint and how it's been influenced. Matching your healing strategies to your specific sensitivities, choosing tools and rhythms that are genuinely aligned with your wiring, and using rituals to consciously acknowledge and close those intergenerational loops. It empowers you to gain agency to stabilize your system, rather than trying to become someone you're not or fight against your fundamental nature.
It adds a layer of depth, explaining why certain patterns might be so persistent without making them fixed fate.
Precisely. It brings self-understanding without resignation. And from understanding our inherited patterns, we move to the relational field, Axis 8, relational synchrony. The clear, powerful statement here is you cannot heal alone.
Our nervous system evolved in the context of connection. We are wired for co-regulation. That's becoming more widely understood now.
Absolutely. And the source emphasizes that relational dysregulation, being in environments or relationships that are chronically triggering, invalidating, or unsafe, can easily override and pull even significant internal healing work back into survival mode. If your external relational field is constantly demanding or chaotic, it's incredibly hard for your internal system to stay regulated or integrate change. So relational synchrony, learning to navigate connections in a way that supports mutual regulation, is presented as a fundamental axis for long-term transformation.
How does the system propose rebuilding this relational synchrony?
It outlines a framework for rebuilding this capacity, starting with awareness. First, relational imprint awareness. Tracing back those early attachment patterns and significant relational experiences that shaped your core expectations about relationships, the roles you tend to fall into or force others into, and which parts of yourself you learned were unacceptable and had to be hidden, connecting to acts as the first. Awareness of these foundational imprints is the first step to interrupting old patterns in current relationships.
Understanding the original blueprint that's still influencing how you show up in relationships today.
Yes.
Okay.
Second, emotional co-regulation skills. This is about learning the practical how of how nervous systems interact and stabilize each other. It involves becoming attuned to subtle cues like tone of voice, pacing of conversation, physical presence, and timing. The system teaches skills like tone tracking, noticing the emotional tone beneath the words, setting micro-boundaries, small, clear signals about what you need or what's not okay in the moment, using repair language after conflict, and emotional timing, knowing when a conversation is possible and safe and when it's not. It also includes self-to-other attunement practices, like consciously matching your breath or moderating eye contact to match another person's nervous system. It's described as learning a form of neurobiological choreography.
Learning the subtle dance of interaction that supports mutual safety and connection. I like that, neurobiological choreography.
Exactly. It's applying the principle of rhythm externally. And third, ecosystem redesign and boundary precision. This is about consciously and actively designing your support system instead of just hoping helpful people show up. It involves evaluating current relationships based on the level of synchrony and support they offer, prioritizing high safety, high integrity connections, and practicing layered boundaries, not just saying no, but establishing clear expectations about physical space, emotional availability, digital contact, and time. The source introduces a framework like the core synchrony map, categorizing relationships into an inner core, highest trust, mutual regulation, growth circle, peers for shared journey, and containment allies, support for acute crisis.
So it's not about dramatically cutting people out of your life necessarily, but about recognizing which relationships support synchrony and which ones consistently pull you into old desynchronized patterns and then structuring your interactions accordingly.
That's a crucial distinction. The source emphasizes that the body cannot complete its healing process if it exists in a relational field that constantly mirrors and reinforces old wounds and distortions. This axis highlights that healing is fundamentally interdependent. And as you become more regulated internally, through work in the previous axis, your presence can also become a more stable signal for others, fostering connection without collapse.
Wow. So we've journeyed through the 8 axes, covering everything from the micro level of neurobiology and the physical body, through the internal landscape of emotions, parts, and story, out to our relationship with time itself, our inherited patterns, and finally, our connections with others. Is a really comprehensive view. How does the system bring all these layers together for practical application?
That leads us to part 5, integration, application, and redefining healing. This is where the rubber meets the road,
Yeah.
It introduces the Personal Resynchronization Protocol, or PRP, and structures its practice within the 21-day cycle.
PRP.
The PRP is presented as the living, adaptive framework for applying the principles of Synkronia in your daily, weekly, and monthly life. It's explicitly not a fixed, rigid plan, but a system to be practiced and adapted based on your unique biology, your current life circumstances, and the insights you gain as you go.
So it's a personalized map that you build and refine.
Exactly. It has 5 key elements that you design into your protocol. Foundational anchors. These are the absolute baseline non-negotiables for establishing biological rhythm, things like fixed wake-sleep times, morning sunlight exposure, structured meal timings, daily movement, and a consistent pre-sleep ritual. They stabilize those core circadian and biological rhythms.
Got it. The basics.
Emotional regulation stack. Selecting specific practices from the RASE model and other techniques, curated for both proactive daily use, e.g. morning check-in, emotional hygiene, and reactive use, e.g. a specific breath technique when triggered, a quick RASE loop.
Okay, your go-to tools.
Right. Relational synchrony schedule. Intentionally designing your interpersonal cadence scheduling time with high-safety connections from your core synchrony map, practicing micro-boundaries in real-time interactions, and scheduling time for relational repair if needed.
Being intentional about connection.
Yes. Cognitive plus narrative hygiene. Daily practices to manage your internal dialogue and story, things like morning journaling for pattern notes from Axis 5, doing quick belief audits, re-entering positive narratives, Axis V, and managing your cognitive diet. Who and what information are you letting in?
Cognitive diet. That's interesting.
And cycle-based adjustments. The crucial piece for adaptation. Recognizing that your needs and capacity change based on your biological cycles, menstrual cycle, seasonal changes, stress levels, recovery needs after illness or travel. Your PRP isn't static. You flex its intensity and focus based on where your system is in its various cycles.
So the PRP is like your daily playbook, and the 21-day practice cycle is the structured field where you rehearse and integrate that playbook.
Yes, that's the way they frame it. The 21-day rationale isn't pulled out of thin air. The source notes it aligns with biological cycles for habit formation and provides sufficient time for synaptic reorganization in the brain and for rehearsing your new identity and patterns in real-world contexts. It's about consistent contact with the practices over time, which builds resilience rather than aiming for intense, short-lived bursts.
And the cycle has a specific structure to the day.
Yes, it's broken into 4 modular phases designed for reinforcement. AM grounding often involves light exposure, breath work, a quick internal check-in, a core practice block, a dedicated 30-45 minutes for more focused RISE work, somatic practice, narrative ritual, or movement, recovery rhythm, honoring those ultradian breaks throughout the day, and evening integration, reviewing the day's patterns, perhaps quick conflict journaling, and the non-negotiable sleep ritual from CSDS.
And there are built-in review points to keep it adaptive.
Absolutely. The 21-day cycle is often broken into weekly themes. Week 1 might focus on heightened awareness of your current rhythms and patterns, Week 2 on intentional repatterning using chosen protocols, and Week 3 on consolidation of the new rhythms. Day 7 includes a mandatory review ritual where you assess the past week's progress, notice what worked and what didn't, and adjust your PRP for the following week based on your own biofeedback. This prevents the system from becoming rigid.
This tracking element sounds important, but also potentially overwhelming if you focus on perfection.
That's why the source introduces micrometrics for realignment. The focus is on tracking trends, not hitting perfect numbers. These could be things like daily journaling notes on emotional clarity, energy levels, moments of part coherence versus conflict, estimated sleep quality, noticing moments of relational synchrony or dysregulation. Weekly metrics might include narrative stability, did I fall back into old stories, how I handled conflict, consistency with ritual engagement. It's qualitative tracking to inform adjustment, not quantitative judgment.
And setting expectations is crucial. What should someone anticipate when starting this cycle?
The source is very upfront. Expect emotional surfacing, resistance from parts that like the old patterns, and moments of identity confusion as you integrate new ways of being. These are framed as features of the system reorganizing, not failures of the system or you.
Okay, features, not failures. That's helpful.
Yeah. They also give clear guidance on what to avoid. Skipping the weekly reviews, trying to double down and push harder when you feel overwhelmed, instead, scale back. And focusing on performance metrics over the process of rhythmic return. The most important instruction if you miss a day or a practice: return. Don't restart the whole cycle. Synkronia is a return system.
That return, don't restart, is incredibly freeing. Takes the pressure off perfection.
It reframes perceived failure as simply needing to return to the practice, reinforcing the rhythmic nature of the work. The source also mentions practical tools provided alongside the system, like journaling templates and the thimble activation frameworks.
Yes, they describe these as practical extensions of the system's architecture. Journaling templates are often structured to follow a regulate, reflect, reorganize flow, helping you apply RISE and pattern mapping daily. Symbol activation frameworks provide guidance on how to decode your personal symbols from Axis V and assign them new meaning through ritual. Guided emotional sequences walk you through applying RISE to specific emotional themes. Micro-ritual structures help you design small, potent actions for transitions or conflict closure. They emphasize using these tools with presence and intention, not just as automated checkboxes.
They are scaffolding for embodied integration of the principles, really making it part of your nervous system.
Beyond self-practice, the system heavily emphasizes that healing requires co-regulation and external support.
Right, reinforcing that you cannot heal alone. A key practice introduced is self-witnessing, learning to observe your own internal patterns, thoughts, emotions, sensations, from the perspective of your present self, Axis 5, with structured compassion and the capacity for real-time recalibration. This involves using journaling prompts, setting time-bound loops for processing difficult moments, identifying parts involved in conflict, and practicing post-event rituals. This is something you practice daily and weekly.
And then there's the concept of micro-mentorship. What's that?
This is a very practical approach to external support. designed to be decentralized, low friction, and high integrity. Instead of relying on a single therapist or mentor for everything, you intentionally cultivate a small network of 3 to 5 individuals who serve specific roles based on the axes.
Oh, okay.
Maybe one friend you can call for relational pattern processing, axis 8, another peer who understands the biological rhythms, axis 6, a symbolic ally who supports your narrative work, axis V, or a structural support for practical life organization. These are relationships for intermittent recalibration designed to support your system without fostering dependency.
And the layered long-term emotional support system builds on that idea.
Yes, it's designing your entire relational ecosystem intentionally, mapping out your core synchrony map, inner core for deep, reliable connection, your growth circle, peers or mentors who support your journey, your containment allies, people you can lean on during high-load, dysregulated periods, and your witness practices. Those self-to-self practices like voice notes or journaling where you witness yourself. This network needs to be consciously built, nurtured, and allowed to evolve as you integrate the work and your needs change.
It's a far cry from just hoping you have enough friends. It's designing an intentional support structure. Finally, how does the system define healing itself? What are the markers of progress?
This brings us to the concluding insight, redefining healing as chrono-alignment. The system's summary definition is clear. Healing is not the elimination of symptoms, but the reintegration of time.
The symptoms themselves are seen as temporal fractures, like cracks in time.
Precisely. Common experiences like chronic anxiety, depression, dissociation, obsessive thinking, or pervasive shame are viewed as states where parts of your system are stuck in a different time, a past threat, a frozen emotional state, a loop of outdated beliefs.
So healing is about bringing those parts back into sync with the present moment.
Exactly. It's aligning your inner experience of time with outer consensual time across multiple layers. Biological time ensuring your hormones, sleep cycles, and attention spans are aligned with the actual rhythms of the day and night, supported by consistent timing inputs from CSDS.
Right.
Emotional time reclaiming your present emotional state from being dictated by past loops, using RASE and symbolic work. Narrative time updating your identity story so they reflect your current capacity and reality, not just conclusions from the past. And relational time repairing synchrony with others so interactions unfold in the present moment of mutual regulation, not constantly triggering old relational imprints.
True healing, or chrono-alignment, is when your inner and outer rhythms match. Your nervous system responds appropriately to now. Your story reflects your current strength and capacity, your rituals reinforce present reality, and your relationships unfold in the real time of connection and repair.
It's a fundamental shift in perspective from trying to force control or fix perceived brokenness to gently guiding your system back into its natural, coherent rhythm.
It offers a powerful, layered, and like you said, surprisingly elegant lens through which to view our struggles and our potential for change. Instead of trying to fix things that feel broken, you focus on gently, consistently, and rhythmically realigning your internal systems: biological, emotional, narrative, and relational.
And the journey through the system's 8 axes and application framework provides the detailed roadmap for that process, from stabilizing the biological foundation and listening to the body's deep wisdom, to skillfully processing emotions in sequence, understanding your internal landscape and updating your stories, and finally redesigning your relationship with time itself and the supportive ecosystems around you.
It's presented as a living system, not a static one, designed to evolve with you. It's fundamentally about the practice of return to breath, to body, to your authentic story, to biological and relational alignment, practicing that return again and again.
It acknowledges the reality that life means you will inevitably fall out of sync sometimes, but it equips you with the knowledge and tools to recognize it sooner and return to coherence more skillfully each time.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Here's where it gets really interesting. Consider your own day, your own experience. Where do you feel most out of sync? Is it a mismatch between your body's natural energy rhythm and your schedule? An emotional loop that pulls you back to a past feeling whenever a certain trigger appears? A story you're still telling yourself about your limitations that originated years ago? Or perhaps a relational pattern that consistently throws your nervous system off balance?
What might shift in your experience if you started to simply notice the timing, the rhythm, and the temporal dimension of these experiences rather than solely focusing on the content or judging yourself for them?
That simple act of observing your own internal clockwork, understanding the principles of chronal alignment from a system like Synkronia, might just be the most powerful step you can take towards finding lasting coherence and well-being. It's a different kind of work, isn't it? Centered on rhythm, not force. A deep dive indeed. Thanks for exploring this fascinating system with me.
Always a pleasure. A lot to think about there.